So we go to the next section, which is mapping type. And mapping type is essentially a mapping, is something like a hash map. Basically, it ties one type to another type. Similar to a dictionary in Python, you're tying one value to another one. In this case, one type to another type. And when you create a mapping, very important thing to note is in Solidity, own keys exist for the mapping when you first create the mapping. What does that mean? That means, for example, you create something like mapping address to a uint 256, address to value. If you haven't set any key and value, then on address that you input will return default value of uint 256, which is 0. And every single address, even if you set any key and value on the address, and if you put like a random address in, it's still gonna return you the default value. So you cannot do something like, the reason why you have to be mindful of this, because you cannot do some techniques like, oh, you have a mapping, and then if this value doesn't exist, but technically on value actually exists, it's just the value is 0. So it has essentially infinite size when it comes to mapping. So let's look at an example just right here. You have a contract called mapping. So you can declare a variable called myMap with the visibility public, and it's a mapping between an address and a uint. Uint here is short for uint 256. And what you can do is you can do a function, right? You can do a function to get it, right? Let's go this function get. You are passing in an address, and you see here addr underscore, and it's type address. You're passing in an address, and it will return you a uint. Basically, you based on this mapping. So put an address in, it will return you the uint, right? So if you look at the return, it's taking my map, you put the address in, and the return is uint. Very straightforward. You can also set it, which is if you pass in an address and you pass in a number, and what it's going to do is going to update the value at this address. So if you do some of this syntax, so think like a hash map, right? So this map at this address is gonna be updated with this value, which is the one that you pass in. You also you can reset the value to default value, which is 0 as well. So you can do delete, which is you add the address in, and use delete, and at that address the value is gonna be 0. You can also do nested mapping, which is you right here. So you're mapping an address, and then this address is mapped to a uint, and this one is mapping to a boolean, so it's called nested. So what you can do, it's like an object with multiple layers. So let's say you look at a getter function for this. You're passing in an address, passing in an uint, which is here is an underscore I. So think about it's something like an index, right? And it returns you a boolean. So you get value from nested mapping even when it's not initialized. So you go for nested. Right, you put in the address, you pass in an address, pass in an index, and it will return you, the boolean at that point. Right, so basically you're looking at something like a string, like an address. That address will give you it will tie with an index, and then if you pass in like the essentially that address will tie with another mapping, and then you pass in another integer that will essentially, and then will return you the boolean at that point. So you can have something nested like that. You also set it, very similar. And this is the syntax. You do nested square brackets for the address, and square bracket for the integers you want to query essentially. And you can also remove, right? It's similar behavior as before. It just reset the value to the default value. Doesn't delete it from the hash map.